What would happen if you went up to a vending machine where the candy bars in the vending machine cost $1 and you put in 50 cents?
Don't have enough.
Bad investment. Not enough. Well, when you get half a candy bar? I mean, if a candy bar is $1 and you put in 50 cents, you should get half a candy bar, right? Just on some level, it makes sense. But the rest of it, what we know is like that's not how it works. A vending machine absolutely will not, never, ever will work that way. But do we approach our Christian life that way a little bit? It's like, God, I know there could be more to this Christian life, but how about if I give this and I should get proportionate to that? 50 cents for $1, I should get half of the experience of the Christian life. Now, I'm not talking about doing works. God does not grade us on works. Grace says that, we are saved as a result of our faith in Him, relying on Him, surrendering to Him, committing to Him. But that's what I am talking about. This whole section, we've been talking about commitment. And I mentioned last week, our commitment doesn't have to be perfect. It will never be perfect. But it can't be partial. Because in reality, there's no such thing as partial commitment. Committing to God is giving up control. And if I only commit to Him in this area, if I only give up control in this area, and this area, but not this one, who's really in control? Yeah, I still am, because I've decided, God, okay, you can have this, but not this. Here's the limit, here's my line. I'm still in control, so I really haven't committed. Partial commitment is no commitment. And again, God doesn't expect us to be perfect, but He does expect total, complete commitment. And then we experience this Christian life. Well, again, that's been the focus. Ever since Jesus came down the mountain from the Sermon on the Mount, He's been talking about true faith versus just believing. He's been talking about not just having Jesus come in and improve our version of life, but radically transforming our lives. Last week, not just being changed, but being truly committed to Him. All of that, and He continues it here, but He does it with a different format. He begins to teach in parables. Chapter 13 is full of parables, these stories that Jesus tells, and they illustrate the same idea we've been seeing. And it's interesting, especially what we're going to look at today, they illustrate it doubly. Because just the nature of parables themselves, we're going to see, there's something about them. It takes something to even get the point of a parable. And then the point of today's parable we're going to look at is the same element. We're going to look at the parable of, Jesus calls it the parable of the sower. And I hate to disagree with Jesus, but I'm like, it's really the parable of the soils, because the sower's the same. There's no lesson about the sower. It's all about the soils. That's the emphasis, but He calls it actually down here. Let me tell you about the parable of the sower. So, we'll go with that because Jesus said it, but the focus is on the soils, just let me tell you. And Jesus knew that. He just maybe was trying to get us awake for a while. And so the question I want us to ask today is, why does each soil have its effect? Because I want to see that there could be some ways that again, are total commitment to God, but imperfect, that each problem with the soil might affect us, even though we've got that commitment. So I want us to see, what is it, and is it impacting me? So let's look here. Chapter 13, verse 1 says, that same day Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Again, ever since He came down the mountain from Matthew 7 to 8, there's been these phrases that tie everything together. And it doesn't mean it all happened on one day, but every time it just keeps picking it up. Matthew wants you to know this all goes together. Keep it in mind. It's all the context. Such large crowds gathered around Him that He got into a boat and sat in it while all the people stood on the shore. Then He told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still others' seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. Now, that verse 9 is a key verse here. Whoever has ears. Well, who has ears? Everyone, unless you're Vincent van Gogh and you're missing one through your own choice. For the most part, everyone has ears. So he say, whoever has ears, let him hear. It's not just hear the sounds. It's, are you hearing this? Are you getting this? Our dog Rio talks to us, a lot of times. If you've ever been around, she was talking this morning and just wouldn't stop. And I think the thing, we heard her, but I think there's something in her mind. So, yeah, but you aren't hearing me. Nothing's changing. You aren't doing what you probably know I want you to. Jesus, that's what he's talking about. Whoever has ears, that's everyone, hear this, get this, listen to this, be open to it, and then act on it. Now, we're going to skip down. Jesus next talks about the nature of parables themselves, but if we skip down to verse 18, he's going to specifically interpret this parable, and I want to look at that first. So, verse 18, he says to his disciples, and he's gotten off alone with them. He told the parable to the crowds. Now he's talking to the disciples. Look then to what the parable of the sower means. Now, let's stop there, because the first question or first thought it raises is, why does Jesus have to explain that? Have you ever heard about parables? They're these simple stories. Jesus tells these simple stories so you can easily get the meaning, and that's not really what a parable's like, is it? Or else Jesus wouldn't have to explain it to these disciples. We're going to see later in the chapter, they specifically ask him, what's the meaning of this? And even everything we're going to see in the middle today. You're going to make the point. It's been pointed out, parables, they're sort of a double-edged sword. They both conceal and reveal. Parables conceal the truth. Jesus doesn't just come out and say the lesson, just straightforward. But they also, if you're willing to be open to it, certainly willing to work at it a little bit, they reveal the truth in a way that goes beyond just straightforward talking. And the difference, that what makes the difference is the heart. Where's my heart? So let's look at that. He explains, verse 19, when anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. So the problem there, he says, does not understand it. So what's that mean? Dumb people won't get into heaven? You hear this and it just doesn't click, doesn't register. You can't get it. You don't get into heaven. No, because remember what we just saw in verse 9. Whoever has ears, let him hear. Everyone's capable. It's our choice. It's up to our heart whether we're going to understand it. And that word in Matthew has that idea. It's understand. It's like hearing. It's understanding with action that follows based on that. And it's a heart issue. It's where we are in our commitment to God. I've said it often, and hopefully we realize this because it goes so counter to what a lot of people think. Unbelief, not following Jesus, not committing to him, it's a matter of the heart and the will, not the mind. A lot of people will tell you, well, there's just not enough evidence for me. No, there's plenty of evidence. The evidence isn't clear enough. No, it's plenty clear enough. That's really what we're seeing here. It's a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the will. I don't want to accept it for some reason. Why is that? Maybe a person won't accept this seed of the true seed of the gospel because they've been exposed to some bad seed. I met some people that, the version of Christianity they heard was very legalistic, and they came to think, that's Christianity, I don't want it. And so anytime they maybe hear about it later, that's what's, oh no, I've been there, done that, don't want it. Maybe it's a problem with the sower, whoever's specifically sowing the seed, passing it on to them. Maybe they see some hypocrisy that this person says this, it doesn't live anything like it. I don't want anything to do with that group, that person, that Christianity. Maybe it's some of what's become associated with Christianity nowadays. There's certainly a thought in a lot of people's mind that, Christianity, oh yeah, that's Republicans, that's people who don't like gay people, that's people, and just all this down the line. That's Christianity. Well, I don't want that. And it's not the message, it's not the seed, it's something, again, about the sower and what we've added to that. Or maybe it is, again, just the people don't want it. They don't want to change. They don't want to give up. I hear this so often, or someone, again, someone was talking to me the other day. She says, I talked to someone about God, and finally it came down and says, I don't want to believe because I'd have to give up the stuff. And I thought about the irony of that. You talk about not understanding. choosing not to understand, but you're choosing not to because, boy, you really don't understand just what it is, what Christianity entails. Jim Elliot had a quote, he's no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. It's like it's a great deal if you understand it, if you realize it. It gives up these things on earth we can't keep anyway to gain what we can't lose. And I would add to gain what we're looking for all the time, to gain what's truly most important. But if you don't understand it, and again, because you choose not to, because you've just not taken the time, you're not open enough, you won't accept it. Well, again, the central question, why does each soil have the effect it has? Why will the path result in the seed being snatched away? And notice what it says. It says the evil one comes and snatches it away. Never forget, we are up against someone. I think a lot of Christians live their lives, when it comes to Satan and his opposition, it's like we're playing a basketball game, but there's no other team. We're running our plays and we're running down the court, and there's something that's required. You still got to make it in the hoop, but there's no one else trying to guard us, trying to oppose us. That's not the Christian life. There's another team there against us. We have to realize that. The evil one comes and snatches it away. And why? How is he able to? Well, again, because it says the person doesn't understand it. They don't understand. And this is the key to, it's interesting, to all the soil problems. Because look down at verse 23. This is the path, the worst example. It doesn't even take root at all. But down at verse 23 it says, but the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. That's really the key to all of these. Again, it's understanding what this seed, which is the Word of God, what it is and everything it entails. And again, the big lesson is it's not that anyone is unable to understand it. Some people are just unwilling to. They're not open to it for whatever reason. Well, on the path, what is it that these people don't understand? The basics. They don't understand there's a God. They hear the message, and for whatever reason, well, no, I don't believe in God. I look around, I see this world, and for whatever reason, to them, it's more reasonable to think it just came out of nowhere, out of chance. That's, again, faith. Faith is the opposite of sight, but they're going by faith as well, and it takes a lot more faith to believe this is all an accident. Or maybe there's some conception of God, but they don't understand His purpose. Why would God create us? He didn't need us. He created us to have that relationship with us. He wants that. It tells about His love. And then maybe the person doesn't understand lostness. Like, I believe in God. God, we're okay. Well, no, every one of us has sinned. And part of God's nature is His holiness, and it separates us from Him. And on our own, we are lost. And we need to understand the cross, what Jesus did, God's continued love, His grace, His favor bestowed when wrath is owed. For whatever reason, that's the path. They don't understand the basics, and so it never even takes root. Well, verse 20, Jesus explains the second type of soil. He says, the seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Now, this rocky ground, Jesus explains it a little more in verse 5. If you go back there, some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. When you think of rocky ground, we might think of what we see out here, that there's some ground that's just full of little pebbles or rocks, whatever. That wasn't it. This was ground that was underneath a layer of soil. There was solid rock. And so the soil itself was okay. It just wasn't deep. And that's what happens here. It sprang up quickly. And, at once, it says in the interpretation, at once this person receives the word of God on some level, but they have no root. And again, you look at verse 6, you see how he just, in the parable itself, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. And if seed fell in this thin soil with rock underneath it, again, it could begin to take root real quickly, but the roots wouldn't be able to go anywhere. And so when the sun comes up, and it's not necessarily just the next day, but when it's out of the rainy season and the sun is there, it can't dig down and get into the moisture that's there underneath. Well, what's that mean for us? Or first of all, look at it. It's interesting. He says, when trouble or persecution comes because of the word. Did you catch that? When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, in other words, because of this person accepting the word, well, how is that? You know, there's trouble in life for everyone. How is it going to be directed specifically at people who have accepted the word? It goes back to the evil one, doesn't it? You know, the only way there's going to be any type of, purpose behind it, some kind of focus on those of us who have accepted the word, is there's someone, the evil one, who's going to make sure. Okay, you've accepted the word. I'm going to make sure there's some trouble, some persecution in your life. Not a great thought to think about, but good to be aware of. And notice it says they only last a short time. It's going to happen soon. Satan is going to bring that. And it says when trouble or persecution, not if. Today I want us to see, why does each type of soil have its effect? Why will rocky ground result in a person quickly falling away? Did you notice what Jesus says in the interpretation? He says, at once this person receives it with joy. And on the surface, that might sound good. Well, they hear the message and right away they accept it with joy. Shouldn't everyone do that? But it seems maybe, especially when you look at everything he's saying there, that he's setting it up, at once. They didn't really give it a lot of thought. There's another parable where Jesus talks about counting the cost. What's it going to mean to make this commitment to Jesus? And where they receive it with joy, certainly there is joy in serving Jesus. I think there's an old hymn there somewhere. But there's also some elements of this Christian life that aren't easy. And it seems like the problem is this person has some superficial expectations. I'm going to accept Jesus. I'm going to have my sins forgiven. I'm going to go to heaven, and everything in between is just going to be great. I'm committed to Jesus now. I'm following Jesus. Everything. Life, there shouldn't be problems for a follower of Jesus, right? And there's some people who would think. And here's that. We laugh at that. But even then, don't we sometimes have, I know there's some problems, but boy, there shouldn't be that many problems. The problems shouldn't last that long. We've got our own issues when it comes to that sometimes. And so, again, I said the key to all these soils is understanding or lack of. Here, it's understanding the nature of Christianity. It's not the basics before. There is a God, lostness, all that. It's, all right, what is the Christian life? What's it entail? I mentioned last week I watched a webinar on discipleship, and they had, I think, 5 different main speakers, 5 or 6 that they interviewed. One person would actually talk for like 15 minutes, and then they'd all interact on that, and they each had a different subject. And 5 of them, if there were 6, 5 of them were from the U.S., 1 of them was from India. And you know what? If you had read the transcript of this, and not just listened to his Indian accent, you would know exactly what things he said. And these people here, these 5 were committed to discipleship, but still there was just such a different perspective. His name was K.P. Yohanan, and he said this, one thing I wrote down. He says, the foundational necessity for discipleship is embracing suffering. The foundational necessity for discipleship, and remember, discipleship is the same as being a Christian. It's not that advanced degree Christian stuff. Everyone. So the foundational necessity for even becoming a Christian, for living this Christian life, is embracing suffering. Now, that doesn't mean you look for it, you try to find it, you go out of your way. It doesn't mean you like it and say you like it and lie about liking it, but you just realize it is part of the Christian life. Another person quoted Eugene Peterson. How did I in the world get those two confused? Just T.S. Eliot, that's such a good literary reference. American culture is stubbornly resistant to the way of Jesus. American culture is stubbornly resistant to the way of Jesus. We don't really want the way of Jesus. We want Jesus, but again, we want Jesus on our terms. Jesus, come into my idea of how life should be, and please make it better, because life should be this way. It's not. I bet you can really improve things. It's just so different. And we're in the midst of this culture. So, again, you have these totally wrong expectations. Well, what's the key to avoid this? Right expectations. Doesn't that make sense? 2 Timothy 3:12, it's on your handout, says, in fact, everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. Is there any question there, any doubt there? Everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ will be persecuted. Now, does that mean we're going to be, physically persecuted for our faith, thrown in jail, tortured? Not necessarily. There are certainly people you read about. I mean, if you just look at the regular news, it doesn't even have to have a Christian slant. You'll see it every week. There's things going on. Churches burned down, people killed for their faith. And that may be, but remember, it's not just the persecution. It can be the trials, the troubles too, that Satan will bring on people for being a Christian. One way or the other, we are going to experience difficulties. If we don't know that, if we're not aware of that and prepared for that and ready for that. I hear so many people, and again, I certainly support and I commend the effort to try to keep things, in the Christian spirit that our nation was founded. But at the same time, there's this part of me that realizes it's probably not going to stay that way, and we shouldn't be surprised. It never does stay that way. There's going to be more and more persecution, not less. Verse 22, Jesus looks at another type of soil. He says, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. So again, these two soils, there's some similarities and difference between the rocky soil and the thorny. In the rocky soil, the trouble and persecution come later, specifically because the person is a Christian, because of the word, because they've accepted the word. The thorny soil, the thorny ground, the worries of the life and deceitfulness of wealth, those are present to begin with. And they're present in general. They were just there already before the person accepted the word. That's a part of life, worries of life, deceitfulness of wealth. And again, why does this thorny soil, why does it result in the effect it does? Why does it make the word unfruitful, as it says? Well, notice there's two kinds of thorns. And it says both types, the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth, choke the word. Choke the word. What's that mean? If we know anything about plants, these weeds, they take all the food that's there in the soil. They take all the water that comes down, the sun that's shining there. They take all of that. And the good plants that try to grow, they aren't able to. They're choked out because of that. Well, for us, again, the lesson is these things, they take our focus. They take our energy in life. They really, again, that's another way to look at commitment. These things have our commitment. Well, how is that true? The worries of this life. And you see them constantly battling for our focus and for our energy, which is another word for commitment. And think about it, sometimes you think about worries of this life, sometimes we think about the big problems. I go along today, no worries. Oh, here's a big problem, here's a worry. No, just our normal everyday, how I make a living. That's the worries of this life. How I get along in a relationship. That's the worries of this life. What's happening to my health, what might happen now. That's the worries of this life. And how much time do we spend on those, even when there's no crisis? How much focus, how much energy? And then the deceitfulness of wealth. Notice not just wealth, but the deceitfulness of wealth. There's something about wealth. But I also want to say this, part of the deceitfulness is to think, I can handle the wealth without the deceitfulness. That's part of the deceitfulness. And not saying it's impossible, but boy, there's just something about wealth. And it affects those other things as well. It's not just wealth for the sake of, I get this and I want this and I'd like this. But boy, if I have wealth, it makes those worries of life less worrisome because I've got wealth. I've got money. I'm set. I'm taken care of. And that's the deceitfulness to think that's where I should put my focus. That's where I should put my trust is in that. It says in 1 Timothy 6, those who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. That's a pretty serious verse. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And again, not money, but the love of it. But boy, it's tough not to love it. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and have pierced themselves with many griefs. We need to take that serious, and especially in our culture. There's some cultures maybe not as serious because there's whole classes of people that I'm never going to have money, ever. It's not my role in this society I'm in. But for us, it's the American dream. It's possible. And again, there's certainly nothing inherently wrong with it, but boy, what comes with it and can come with it. And so the key to all these soils, again, the problem is a wrong understanding. The key is a proper understanding. And the same thing when it comes to worries, when it comes to wealth. Put these in perspective. And it goes back to, if I spend my time focused on God, worshiping God, it puts these worries of life in perspective. This is, it is tough to make a living. It's even tougher when a big need arises and there's the God of the universe. He created this. I think he can handle it. He's kept the world spinning all these years. I bet he can handle my problem. But I got to focus on him. I got to worship him truly, not just the actions, but focus on who he is. And again, make a commitment to the word versus those things. That's the problem in that thorny soil. I've got partly committed to God, partly committed to, I got to spend some time on these worries and that. And again, we got to spend some time making a living, but where's our real focus? Notice what he also says, these thorns choke out the word, making it unfruitful. And that struck me because back in Matthew 12:33, and I put the verse there, Jesus said, make a tree good and its fruit will be good, or make a tree bad and its fruit will be bad, for a tree is recognized by its fruit. He seems to be saying a tree's going to have fruit, either good fruit or bad fruit. And then it says here, unfruitful. Well, how's that? Notice what he said in Matthew 12:30, that same passage from that other verse. He says, whoever is not with me is against me, and whoever does not gather with me scatters. The fact is, every type of plant, every type of tree, it is going to be producing some fruit. But Jesus is saying this was unfruitful, and it's not producing the fruit that it's supposed to be. And Jesus, in different analogies and metaphors, parables, he's going to be using things in opposite ways at times. And we need to be aware of that. And, that comes up even, who's the lion in the Bible? Who's called a lion? God. Who else is called a lion? Who else? Satan. There you go. So you can't say, oh, a lion, that's always Jesus. Same thing. So the parables, be ready for that. There's going to be some things that are different. And same thing here. He's talking about seeds and plants, talking about trees. But that is saying in Matthew there, whoever is not with me is against me. Stop and think about that. And I always think about the Pharisees, because you know what? On the surface even, they started off, they weren't really with him. When the Magi came and said, hey, the Messiah's born, what'd the Jews do? The Jewish leaders? They went to lunch, so, yeah, they totally didn't pay attention. They weren't with him. But we see as he becomes apparent of his focus, they're against him. And same thing can happen. If we're not with Jesus, we're against him. If we're not gathering with him, we're scattering. We're undermining his ministry. And I say this, again, I'm not trying to undermine grace. If you know me, you know the focus I give to grace. God, we are not saved by any level of good works. But it goes back to that idea of we do receive salvation by a commitment to God. And a partial commitment isn't a commitment. It has to be complete. It won't be perfect, how we live it out, but it has to be complete. There can't be any off-the-table areas. Both of these two soils, these second two, the rocky and the thorny, they're both partial commitment, aren't they? You think about the rocky soil, it's shallow. It has a lack of depth. God, I'll live for you as long as nothing bad happens. And the thorny soil, it's crowded. There's a lack of width. It's like, God, there's areas of my life. No, that's you can't get into there because it's taken up by something else. The thorny soil is unfruitful. The rocky soil, the plant withers, so there's no fruit there. Again, partial commitment is no commitment. But Jesus says, verse 23, the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. This person hears the word he says and understands it. So smart people get into heaven. Once again, whoever has ears, let him hear. Anyone can understand this. Anyone can get this and act on it. It's up to us and our heart. And if we will do that, it says it produces a crop. And here's another time where you have to take, what's it mean in this specific parable, in this metaphor of Jesus? Because often a crop are other people. The fields are wide unto harvest. There's all kinds of people ready to come to God. But not here, because people in the parable of the sower, they're represented by the different soils. So what's the crop? It's the effect of the Word in our life. What happens in my life because I have accepted the Word? And it's all the things the Bible talks about, summed up by being transformed into the image of Christ. It's the fruits of the Spirit. Love and joy, patience, peace, gentleness, all those things. It's the rest that Jesus talked about. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. That's part of that fruit. That's part of the crop. And look what Jesus says. He says, it will yield 160 or 30 times what was sown. And I looked, I couldn't find it because this is so different from our culture. When we say something, don't we usually count up? We'd say 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. And I don't know if there's something in their culture. I didn't see anything that said that. My thought was Jesus saying you should expect 100 times. If not that, okay, 60. If not that, 30, which is still great. But he starts at that big number. That should be the Christian life. You should be living it in such a way that just what you receive as a result of living the Word is so overwhelming. Well, again, the central question, why will the good soil result in a crop? Because this person understands the Word. They're open to it. They take the time to do that. And that leads us into today the root problem, and I guess it fits this parable more than any. What's the root problem? And I think, okay, someone laughed. Put that on the tape. Someone laughed. It wasn't loud, but they got it. What is the root problem? And I think it's summed up in these middle verses that Jesus says. Look at verse 10. Go back to that. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? Now, from what we can tell, even though Matthew is putting it here, they probably did that later. It wasn't like they interrupted him because he's going to rattle off some parables here. Seems like later they asked him, and even they asked him in the plural, and he's only said one. But so they take him aside. Jesus, why do you speak to the people in parables? And what's underneath that question of theirs? We see in other places, Jesus spoke to the people in parables, and he knew the effect it was going to have. It was going to thin the crowds. Well, I think the disciples realized that too. And so they're asking, Jesus, why are you thinning the crowds? You're the Messiah. We plan on overthrowing Rome. We need a big group of people, and there's less we had than when you were doing those. They really like those miracles, Jesus. Feeding them especially. That one gets them. But, any miracle will do. Just, why are you speaking them in parables? And look what Jesus answers. He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Now, obviously, it hasn't fully been given to them yet because they asked the question we just saw. But we're going to see what the difference is. They don't have full understanding, but they have full commitment to understand. Whoever has will be given more. They will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. That's not politically correct. This is why I speak to them in parables, he says. Though seeing they do not see, though hearing they do not hear or understand, in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. You will be ever hearing, but never understanding. You will be ever seeing, but never perceiving. For this people's heart has become calloused. They hardly hear with their ears, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn, and I would heal them. That sounds like favoritism, doesn't it? Like, I'm going to give it to you guys. You're my close inner circle of friends, but they aren't going to get it. Again, not very politically correct nowadays, where everyone should get even. Well, what's the key to the good soil? He hears it, the word, and understands it. What's the problem with the other soils? He doesn't understand it. Either the basic truthfulness of the path itself, God and all that, or the nature of it. But remember what's at the heart of all of these soils? It is the heart. Every person, whoever has ears, let them hear. Everyone's capable of this. And so even as Jesus says this, he quotes from that, all these people, they're seeing but not seeing, not understanding, hearing but it's not sinking in. Is that because of Jesus? Was he tricking them? No. He's saying the same thing to everyone. And there were people who would follow him. But those people had to have some initial commitment to God. Whatever you say, that's what I'm going to do. The root problem is these people don't want to understand. Because they don't want to live out the implications. No, I don't. I won't. I won't hear it. And put their hand over their ears. That's not the message I want, Jesus. And so the key to overcoming, again, the disciples asked Jesus, why do you speak in parables? Because he's showing in the parables of themselves the need for commitment. That's the double illustration today. This parable talks about commitment, but parables in general say you need commitment to understand the message of a parable. And this parable says you need commitment. Whoever has ears, let them hear. You need this openness to the basic truth, which again, that's a surrender. I have to come to Jesus, come to this message. God, whatever you say, all right, I'm in. I'm going to sign my name on that blank paper. Most of the audience couldn't do that. No, they'd already written out, the Messiah will deliver us from Rome. They want Jesus to sign his name to that. I'll sign right under yours if that's what you're promising. And they missed the message of the parables. Not because they weren't able to. Because they didn't really want the message of the parables. They didn't want to hear what Jesus was saying. But here's the thing. If we're truly committed to the truth, surrendered to the truth, whatever it is, we'll find God. If not, we'll miss God. And that's what these people were doing. Now, I thought about it again. What's another theme that we've had for a while? We don't always know what we don't know, do we? You don't know what you don't know, right, Darren? How true is that? How true is that in general? And I thought about us, and I look at these soils, and I thought, maybe I don't know, there's a part of me that's like the path, that I can hear something over and over, and it doesn't sink in at all. Or that rocky soil that, all right away, I'm in, and then, oh yeah, there's something good on TV now. The prayer, God, I'm going to pray to you every morning. Well, not this morning, I'm really tired. Or the thorny soil. There's these things that are already there. It's God, I'm for you, but come on, these other things of life, you just know how much time they take up. And if I could just get a little bit ahead, God, just see how things are going to work out. And that's why I said last week, we need to ruthlessly examine our lives. And that idea of come to them with this assumption, there is something that needs to change versus I wonder if there's something. Because it's easy not to find something if we wonder if there's something. But if we come with the assumption, there is something, what is it? Well, what do I need to do? Now, I thought about two questions that even take that further. First of all, ask yourself, which bad soil am I more inclined to? And I worded it that way, not which bad soil am I, or am I a bad soil? Because then no, I'm not. Which one? Okay, let's say you're not, but if you were, which one would you be more inclined to? Yeah? You thought already? That's good. Which one? And again, it might be different areas. There's this area where I'm that path where I don't even begin to make a commitment. There's this area where I start to and I can never follow through. And there's this area where, I'm doing it, sort of, but boy, I got all these other things going on. Which one am I more inclined to? And how inclined am I? How inclined am I? And then second, how committed am I to understanding? Again, this word that Jesus uses, which does mean, it is some mental element of, I get the truth, I understand how it all fits together, and acting on it. How committed am I to that? And it takes some time, so that's certainly an element. I've got to get in the Word. I've got to be talking with people. I've got to be living it out. But there's also an element of honest examination, that commitment, being willing to deconstruct what I think and how I act on a certain subject. I remember being in a theology class, and a couple things, and they sort of worked together. Someone asked the professor a question, and he had to stop and think about it. And I forget if he said it, they said it. It's like he's got to see how it fits in with his whole theological system. And and I thought, yeah, that's what systematic theology is. It has to all fit together. If it doesn't, he hasn't really thought it out. But the thing that reminded me here is I wrote a paper once that disagreed with him. And here's the thing: I'm me, and he's the doctor and professor, but I got my idea from another professor who, equal standing and credentials. And it's like he didn't even budge, didn't seem to give it much thought. And I wondered, is that because it's really just a dumb idea? Or you've had your idea for so long, you're just like, no, it's too late in life to change. Because if I change that, I'd have to change this and this, again, because they're all linked together. And what about us? When we hear some of these things, are we willing to just totally deconstruct what I think about faith and kindness and growth and giving and whatever it is. We have to be willing to. Or else we're saying, I've got it all figured out and there's nothing I need to change. There is. That's part of it. It's part, and again, the worship of God. When I worship Him and view just who He is, oh yeah, and then me, it makes it a lot easier to believe, yeah, I probably don't have it all figured out. I should be open to some deconstruction and reconstruction. And here's the thing, both of those require grace. You are never going to answer a question like, which bad soil am I more inclined to, if you think that you relate to God on the basis of your works, because you're trying to hide. Well, I can't say that. God might not know. I don't want Him to catch on that I'm inclined toward this bad soil. No, it's not based on that. So you can be honest with God. He knows anyway. And I can be committed to totally deconstructing something I think. God's not up there in heaven saying, oh my, I just don't think you're ever going to get it. No, He's working with us to get it. And then lastly, what will it look like? I always like, when we do this, and I think the verses that we haven't read yet, verses 16 and 17. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. Again, contrasting with those people whose eyes don't see, whose ears don't hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people long to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Do you ever stop and think about the thousands of years? I mean, we know the time from Abram up to Jesus, 2,000. Even before that, these people, they heard little promises, little glimpses, little nuggets of this is what God is going to do. He's going to send someone who's going to bite the heel, have his heel bitten. He's going to crush the serpent. And, there's going to be a Lion of Judah, and there's going to be a descendant of all these things. And the prophets are like, oh, there's something great coming. I wish I could see it. I wish I knew what it was. I know we know more than the guys did before, but, well, we don't know. And Jesus is saying, you guys got the big picture. And you know what? We have an even fuller picture than the disciples had on the day Jesus said it to them. Because we know about the cross. And we have the rest of the New Testament. We can really get it. But to get it, we've got to get it. We've got to hear with our ears whatever it is that Jesus says. And then we'll experience that full commitment. We'll get the full candy bar. Not perfect commitment. I don't know how the analogy would work there with a vending machine. But full commitment. I'll experience that, what Jesus wants, what people for hundreds, thousands of years have been waiting to experience. Well, if you look there, a couple things about that last line that's always on the handout. One, after the discipleship seminar, instead of starting the discussion, I thought, let's start phrasing this, start to live it out. How do we live out the things we've seen in this sermon? And you also notice I don't have anything there. So every once in a while, there's sometimes a question or a thought comes to mind. I'm like, oh, this will get the discussion going. This will help us begin the process of living it out. And sometimes there's just nothing. So it's up to you guys. How do we start to live out what Jesus was saying in this parable of the sower and the soils?